Something incredible happened in Central America 40 years ago. Deaf children in Nicaragua, communicating with each other for the first time ever, spontaneously created a language from scratch. Even though these children had essentially no linguistic input, what they created had all the properties and complexity of any language on Earth. But it was one feature in particular that intrigued linguists. That feature turned out to be the key to unlocking a global linguistic mystery, a mystery that connects the structure of language, our powerful instinct for communication, and hidden biases that shape the way we think and view the world. I'm Ryan, and this is Language of Mind. Before the 1970s, deaf children in Nicaragua lived in complete isolation. Nicaragua had no official sign language and no schools for the deaf. The children were isolated from each other, and they were even isolated from their own families, unable to fully communicate with anyone except through simple, spontaneous gestures. It's hard for me to fully grasp just how lonely this must have been. But this changed in 1977 when the first school for the deaf was built in Managua. For the first time, home signers were able to congregate and form something they never had before, a community. The Nicaraguan government, instead of teaching the children an established sign language, instead focused on teaching them to speak and lip-read Spanish. This failed miserably, but outside of the classroom, something amazing was happening. The children shared and learned each other's gestures, gradually transforming them to a more complex system of communication. By the 1980s, they had created a fully fledged language, exactly as structured and complex as any language on Earth. This story has a happy ending. The children's terrible isolation ended, their world and their minds were unlocked, and what they created gives us a unique window into the structure of the human mind. For human beings, the need to communicate is powerful. If we don't have a language, we'll create our own. But in order to communicate effectively, we have to agree on a common set of rules or conventions. For example, we would need to decide how to order the basic parts of the sentence: the subject, the object, and the verb. The Nicaraguan home signers realized it was easier to understand and be understood if they could agree on what goes where. They needed a word order. Let's think about those three basic building blocks of the sentence: the subject, the object, and the verb. How many ways can you arrange these three pieces? There's 6 permutations of these basic elements. You can put the subject first with SVO, like English, or SOV, like Japanese. Maybe try verb first, VSO, like Berber, or VOS, like Malagasy. Or you can put the object in front with OSV, like Khoi, or OVS, like Hishkariana. Not all of these permutations are equally represented in world languages. According to a recent survey, about 43% of world languages are SOV, 40% are SVO, 10% are VSO, 3% are VOS, and OVS and OSV together account for less than 1% of world languages. Of course, lots of languages are going to have similar word orders because they're related to each other. English, Spanish, French, Norwegian, Icelandic, lots of other European languages have SVO word order, but they all belong to the same Indo-European language family. If we look at word orders by family, the numbers are even more lopsided. 57% of families have SOV order, and only 13% have SVO. Some of this can be explained by syntactic structure. Most linguists believe that all languages share a common tree-like structure. This structure is fundamentally the same across all languages, and it preserves a hierarchy of elements in the sentence. We can derive 4 of the 6 basic word orders from this tree by just flipping the left-right direction of the branches. We can turn SVO into SOV, VOS, or OVS. This is easy to do and doesn't complicate the underlying structure at all. But getting VSO or OSV is trickier. We have to make an extra modification. We have to add another layer to the tree and move the verb. So some orders are much easier to derive than others, but this doesn't explain why SOV is so dominant, or why VSO is more common than VOS. Instead, it looks like we have some kind of inherent bias for subjects to precede objects, and this bias seems to be so powerful that we're willing to substantially change the structure of the tree in order to preserve the subject-object ordering. This may be because talking about events requires us to imagine ourselves participating in the event, and we're much more likely to take the perspective of the agent of the action rather than the recipient. We imagine ourselves as the actors, the initiators, as the subject. That might give grammatical subjects a kind of primacy in our minds that influences the way we communicate. So this explains why SVO, SOV, and VSO are more popular than VOS, OSV, and OVS. but I'm still wondering what it is about SOV in particular that makes it so popular. It's the most prevalent word order in the world, and it's the word order that appeared spontaneously in Nicaraguan Sign Language. The SOV order pops up in other emergent languages too, like Al Said Bedouin Sign Language in southern Israel. These cases are intriguing because they emerge in areas where the only other languages in use have SVO and VSO word orders. So where is this coming from? SOV even emerges spontaneously when people are forced to communicate using gestures, regardless of what language they speak. Studies using gesture communication tasks have found that people tend to default to an SOV word order when they have to communicate about simple scenes to another person. Imagine playing charades. How can you effectively communicate something like, "the boy kicked the ball," using gesture? You might try something like this. This SOV effect has been reported for speakers of SOV languages like Turkish, Japanese, and Korean, but also SVO languages like English, Spanish, and Mandarin, and even VSO languages like Irish and Tagalog. It doesn't seem to matter much what you're used to. When we're forced to communicate using gesture, we default to a common word order. And the SOV bias might go deeper than just communication. It might be the default mode for organizing our thoughts. Let's try a different task. This time I have to recreate a scene by stacking transparent slides. Each slide has an element on it: a boy, a ball, a direction, a goal. I can put them down in any order I want. Any order is going to give me the same outcome. But studies have found that when we do a task like this, even though there's no communication involved at all, we still tend to default to an SOV order, meaning we put the boy down first, then the ball, then the goal, then the arrow to indicate movement. So we seem to have some strong subject initial and verb final biases embedded in our cognition. That explains why SOV is such a dominant word order, but it doesn't explain why SVO is also so widespread. Why aren't all languages SOV? Let's play another game of charades, but this time the scene is a little different. Instead of a boy kicking a ball, it's a girl kicking a boy. Without an agreed upon word order, it might be hard for me to get across who's doing the kicking. There's a potential ambiguity. And that ambiguity is especially tricky if we use SOV. Our boy and girl gestures will be right next to each other. So which one is the subject and which one is the object? And there's another difficulty. What if I missed the first gesture and all I saw was boy kick? Does that mean the boy is doing the kicking? Or is he the one being kicked? I can't be sure. SVO word order can potentially clear this up. Now the subject and object are on opposite sides of the verb. If I miss the subject, I'll see kick boy. This is way easier to interpret. Objects go after verbs, so this has to be the recipient of the action. Studies have backed this up. When participants use gesture to describe scenes where the subject and object could be confused, they tend to switch from SOV to SVO word order. We may have a natural bias for SOV, but there is a communicative pressure pushing us toward SVO. It sometimes makes things a little easier to understand.
I don't know why there is the interference though.
No, it's okay. I think you already did it. The last one you did was perfect.
Yeah, it's just not the word order you want in Turkish.
Another reason we might prefer SVO is locality. Studies have found that across languages, speakers tend to structure things so that related elements in a sentence are as close to each other as they can be. This makes a sentence easier to process because it minimizes the amount that we need to hold in memory. But it comes at a cost. Putting things closer together makes structure less predictable. Languages tend to optimize for both of these, predictability and locality. But optimizing one can come at the cost of the other. SOV languages tend to have higher predictability. The verb always goes at the end. But at the cost of locality. The subject is often very far away from the verb. SVO languages are the opposite. They have good locality. The subject and object are generally right next to the verb, but worse predictability. Sometimes the sentence ends with a verb, sometimes it ends with an object. All languages are engaging in a sort of balancing act, trying to optimize efficiency in these two different conflicting dimensions. There's one more twist in this story about word order. We see SOV order emerge in laboratory experiments and in the real world in emergent languages like Nicaraguan Sign Language. But the emergence of this default word order might actually depend on what you're trying to communicate. Lab studies using gesture have found that while we tend to settle on SOV order to express things like kick or throw, this isn't true for verbs like think. Even speakers of SOV languages like Turkish will switch from SOV to SVO when they use gesture to communicate about non-physical events like thinking or dreaming. This means that the origin of these different word orders might also be influenced by semantics, by meaning. I can't help but wonder if this explains why SOV is so prevalent across the world's languages. Maybe emerging languages like Nicaraguan Sign Language are biased toward SOV because of our need to communicate about tangible physical events. Languages have to balance a lot of competing efficiency demands that nudge them in different directions. A universal agent-first bias explains why over 80% of languages are either SOV or SVO. Predictability pushes them towards SOV. Locality and the desire to avoid ambiguity pushes languages towards SVO. But it could be a small semantic bias for communicating physical events that tilts the scales in favor of the world's #1 word order, SOV. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you're interested in linguistic diversity and the origins of language, check out our video about the evolutionary origins of grammar. It's weirder and older than you might think. Fun fact, word order isn't just influenced by hidden cognitive biases. It might actually, in a subtle way, change the way we think and create new biases. If you want to know more about the connection between language and thought, stick around. We'll be tackling a lot of these questions in future videos. And if there's anything else you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments.